Rutgers hosts Wisconsin football on Saturday at SHI Stadium in Piscataway at noon. Wisconsin coming off a big-time win against Purdue, first conference win of the season, now 3-2, 1-1 in the league. Rutgers coming off that obviously very tough loss at Nebraska, now 4-1, 1-1. Big game for both teams, and to have some insider knowledge in terms of previewing the Wisconsin Badgers, Kedrick Stumbris, who covers Wisconsin athletics for Athlon Sports and has the Sconnie Six Pack podcast. Ben, we've done this before. It's great to have you back. Kedrick, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is the first time we've talked football on the podcast. So I'm excited to break it down.
I'm old. I don't remember. I just know we've talked a bunch and online and offline, and know you're one of the best at covering the Badgers. So happy you're here. A difficult team to figure out just in terms of the schedule, coming off of two top 15 double-digit losses, and then obviously destroyed Purdue, who's, I think, probably not inarguably the worst team in the Big Ten by far. And obviously the injuries you've had as well. Tyler Van Dyke, quarterback, out for the season. Ches Malusi, your number one running back, now on a leave or retirement. I guess overall, what are your thoughts of the start of this team and kind of how they've evolved so far?
So this has been a weird season in which the Badgers are 3-2, but if you ask the fan base, it feels like they only have one win. They started the game, or they started the season rather, with a win over Western Michigan that went deep into the fourth quarter. And if it weren't for a Western Michigan muffed punt in the fourth quarter, they very well could have lost to the Broncos. They also welcomed FCS South Dakota to Camp Randall in the second week of the season and nearly lost that game too. Couldn't pull away. Obviously, they got boat raced by Alabama and fumbled away in the second half against USC when they took a 21-10 lead to the locker room at the half. Purdue's really the first time they've put together a full four-quarter performance in the Luke Fickell era. And I think there's a lot of folks hoping that means they can build off of it, even if Purdue is a less than stellar opponent.
And yeah, the injuries to Tyler Van Dyke, obviously, big time transfer from Miami. Your offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, someone that Rutgers fans had longed for a while in the past, New Jersey native, obviously completely transformed the traditional offense of Wisconsin as a run first to more of a spread offense. I guess this is his second year with Fickell. What are I've seen a lot of kind of discontent online about Longo and the offense. Obviously not convenient to lose your starting quarterback in Van Dyke. I guess what adjustments has Wisconsin made in replacing him with Locke, and then also just overall thoughts on the offense and how they've performed so far?
So the loss of Tyler Van Dyke, who they lost to an ACL tear on the first drive of the game against Alabama, brought in Braden Locke, who has started some games for this program before. He started a couple of games last year, went 1-1 of those starts, including a loss at Indiana, but a win at Illinois. What Tyler Van Dyke can do that Braden Locke can't necessarily is extend plays with his legs. That's the same thing that was the difference last year between Tanner Mordecai, who was the starting quarterback a season ago, now with the San Francisco 49ers, and Braden Locke, was the ability to extend plays, get some stuff going in the run game. That's not necessarily in Braden Locke's bag. However, where Braden Locke does excel, as we've been told kind of over and over again during his 2 years in the program with the coaching staff. He, of course, being a transfer in from Mississippi State, transferring after the untimely passing of Mike Leach. He has been lauded for his knowledge of the playbook over and over. He is the guy who Phil Longo said sets the standard, was his words in the quarterback room. He said that about him this week. Where we've kind of seen that knowledge come out, I think, was finally seeing it against Purdue. Against Purdue, the Badgers ran 73 plays, and Phil Longo said Braden Locke checked them into a different play 17 times. And on 16 of those, they graded that out to a positive effect on the offense. So he, for some of his physical limitations with his legs, I think he does have more of a penchant to throw the ball downfield than some of the other starting quarterbacks for this program under Phil Longo. And maybe, just maybe, he really does have a better grip on the playbook overall, which is allowing them to do some things at the line of scrimmage that at least Purdue.
And in terms of losing Chez Mellusi, obviously, has had a very good career for the Badgers. Was already kind of a platoon system before he left. I've read and heard. I watched Fickell's press conference. He was asked quite a bit about just in terms of that running back rotation and trying to get the offense into a flow using that many backs. I guess against Purdue, does it seem like maybe it's a net positive to have one less back in the mix, where they were able to get a little bit more into a role on the run game? What are your overall thoughts of that running back group now that Mellusi is gone?
I think it is a net positive, which is not even to say anything negative about Chez Mellusi. There was something missing there from him this year. Some of that initial burst that he had that made him look really good last year. Of course, I'm sure some of your listeners are New York Jets fans and know Braylon Allen, who was a standout running back at Wisconsin a year ago. But before Chez Mellusi went down, breaking his leg, he was the leading rusher for this team. He appears to be a really good fit for this Phil Longo offense. But after recovering, and then he had a little bit of a setback in fall camp, something just wasn't the same for him. And I think it was I think it truly was a mutual decision between him and the coaching staff to say, we all know just something isn't quite right here. Let's let you step aside and get healthy. He has a red shirt that he can use in the future. So if he decides to go pro or if he tries to come back, he still has all of his options available to him. And what they did get is an Oklahoma transfer running back, Toby Walker, who has real burst, who can rip off a big play at times for Wisconsin. And behind them, they brought in a trio of 3 to 4 star running backs in Gideon Atuka, who has, I think, maybe saw a couple of snaps against Purdue, Dylan Jones, and then Darian Dupree, who Alabama was going at really hard over last offseason as well. So they feel really confident about all the talent they have back there. And I think just with them not having to force the Chez Mellusi carries, which is kind of what it felt like by the end, where they wanted him to be the number one guy, but it just wasn't quite there. I think it probably is a net positive for the running back room overall.
Shifting to the defense, a little bit different Wisconsin defense than we're used to seeing, with a kind of a little bit of smaller front defensive front for them. What has worked so far for the defense, and what has been kind of a struggle?
Oh gosh, the what has worked question is hard, despite the fact that if you just look at the raw numbers, if you look at the scoring defense numbers, if you look at the yards gained, it's really not that bad. But I think everybody has come to expect something more than not that bad of Wisconsin's defense, of course. You mentioned the smaller defensive line, and that's not what this team wants. This team wishes it had more talent up front. It is where they probably have the weakest position group on the team. The defensive line is made up of guys who were, fringe Power 5 players who were brought in by the previous regime. They have on the edges and at linebacker a few FCS transfers, one that has worked out really well in Elijah Hills, who came over from Albany, one who did not look so great in John Pius, transferring from William and Mary, if I'm remembering that correctly, who set their program record for tackles for loss, and he did it there in only 3 seasons. So there's reason to believe that some of these guys were going to succeed. But they have struggled against the run early on. And what Purdue tried to do in the first half before they fell behind too much was establish running some outside zone concepts and get Wisconsin, which is really struggled on the edge this season. And so, a guy like Kyle Monangai, and I know Kirk Chiraka likes to run a little bit more inside stuff. The defensive line is going to be tested to do that, and linebackers are going to be tested to plug those holes alongside the defensive line. In terms of what they do well, they do have some really good defensive backs. Safety Hunter Wooler is awesome, and he's going to be a pro. Ricardo Hallman, I do not believe anybody has thrown at him between USC and Purdue. I do not think he's been thrown at. If he's been thrown at all, it's only been once or twice since the Badgers have played Alabama. He's a cornerback and will also likely be a pro. So they have some good defensive backs. although Ethan Kelly-McManus's best game of his career was 2022 on a very short notice start against the Badgers. A different defense back then, different defensive coordinator, different personnel. But there is something in the back of my mind that is weirdly just terrified of that one very good Ethan Kelly-McManus game.
You beat me to the punch. You knew I was going to bring that up.
I don't think anybody expected him to ball out as much as he did. He hit a couple of deep shots, took the top over that defense. I don't think that he's going to have that available to him as much. The Kyle Minungai running game would be where I think Rutgers gets its own this week against Wisconsin rather than in the passing game, if I had to guess.
Right. Well, and that's a point of contention for Rutgers fans because it was a feeling that, they kind of went away from Minungai a little bit there in that second quarter against Nebraska after he started off really hot. Offensive line has some issues as well. But if it makes you feel any better about the defense, Wisconsin still has more sacks and more tackles for loss than Rutgers does this year. So obvious improvement against Nebraska, but certainly a point of struggle for Rutgers. In terms of special teams, their field goal kicker Nathaniel Vacco is kind of interesting. He's made both 50-plus yard attempts. He's just one of 3 from 30 to 50. He's pretty good, in terms of being close, under 30. But in terms of special teams, how is, I guess, the confidence of Fickle been with the field goal kicker, and how has that played into the offensive game plan?
It's hard to say because they have tried to show confidence in Nathaniel Vacos, and he was touted as he was touted as a really, really big ad when he transferred in from Ohio after he had a couple of big kicks in the Arizona Bowl, I believe, to beat Wyoming a couple seasons back. And he, like you said, he's been really good from deep. He's been really inconsistent that far in. They try some really deep field goals to end halves. But I don't know that the offensive plan has been changed at all because of him. I think they are trying to figure stuff out. Where I think special teams is more interesting is with the punter, Atticus Bertrams, who has had three punts muffed in the last 2 weeks. A couple of those were from a real sunny day in Madison, and Purdue in the first quarter was having to return kicks staring up into the sun. So I think a couple of those muffs were not necessarily Atticus Bertram's, Aussie punter foot getting the best of the return person back there, but I think it's something to monitor at the very least, because it also happened against USC, and in the 2 that Wisconsin recovered, they were able to punch them in for one-play touchdown drives thanks to Tui Walker. I have no idea what Nathaniel Vacos is as a place kicker at all, basically, is the point that I'm getting at. But I think Wisconsin is very, very, very pleased with Atticus Bertrams in classic Big Ten West fashion. I'm going to take up time on your show talking about the punter.
Wanted to ask about red zone offense, red zone defense. Let's start with the defense. Has opponents are 12-12 in the red zone this year. Only 7 touchdowns, which isn't terrible. But I guess where has the defense struggled in the red zone? And conversely, offensively, 15 of 18 in the red zone in terms of the offense. 11 touchdowns, a little bit above average, but I guess how much has that played into the success and I guess struggles of Wisconsin, both their success offensively and kind of struggles defensively in the red zone?
Defensively, I don't think it's been as big. Like you said, it's 7 touchdowns, but a lot of the points they have given up have been on some of these big plays, big runs ripped off by Western Michigan, Jalen Milroe taking the top off of them against Alabama. But largely, I think it comes back to the defensive front, and this is me kind of giving my best effort at good analysis here, where I think everything has kind of filtered back from the defensive front, where they know in these smaller space situations, they need to bring more bodies close to the line of scrimmage in order to stop someone from gashing them for 10 yards for a quick touchdown. And that leaves some of their defensive backs stranded in coverage. I don't think that's been good for them. In the red zone, this is something that's actually been a bugaboo for Phil Longo's entire career. If you look back at his numbers across his stops at North Carolina and beforehand, kind of the one consistent that you find is that his offenses have not been great in the red zone and have not been great at the red zone at any of his stops. This was a little bit of a hobby horse for people who were Phil Longo skeptical coming into the era when he was hired. And he hasn't done anything to rectify that and quiet those skeptics early on. It's something to monitor. It's something to monitor.
More on the offense. Wisconsin's fumbled it 10 times this year. They've lost half of them. How much has that been from the running backs? How much has that been from the wide receivers? And is it just kind of bad luck? Has it been a kind of a fundamental issue? And how worried, I guess, are you about that being a long-term issue this season?
A couple of them have been from the running backs, and that's where I think the biggest issues have been. Going back to the conversation about Ches Malusi, he had a couple of fumbles before he sat out for the season, and I think in both of those fumbles, they came like at the end of big runs where he was ripping off big plays for this offense and actually turned the ball over instead of picking up 20, 30 yards. And that has been why about part of the reason the offense has stalled and maybe doesn't look as good as some of the other numbers might suggest. It's an issue. I don't think one that's been brought up in the conversation all that much about Wisconsin's offensive struggles. More of it has been about the play of Braden Locke to date, who wasn't great, and them not really having anything in particular that they could lean on up front. The offensive line is okay, but it's good. But I think at Wisconsin, they've come to expect more. So fumbles, well, yeah, the numbers haven't been awesome there. I don't think is where Wisconsin has had a ton of concern yet. We don't hear the coaching staff talk about it all that much. We don't hear really folks in the media harping on it. It's not perfect, but not necessarily where people are pinning the blame right now.
In terms of this team, relatively young, just year two of Luke Fickell. Only the second road game. First one was at USC. Obviously, not a cross-country trip here in the Midwest, but now to the other side of the country. How concerned are you about this team going into this environment in terms of, it's a big game for both teams. Rutgers is coming off a tough loss. And Wisconsin, obviously, confidence all sky high right now after that big win at Purdue. But I guess how much do you think that was Wisconsin improving with the young players they have and the personnel changes they've had through the injuries, and how much of that was just playing the worst team in the Big Ten, and kind of what are you expecting from them going into this game?
That's the $1 million question, Aaron. Is what happened against Purdue replicable going forward against a team that I think is a lot better with Rutgers? And this is kind of a dichotomy between these two teams where Rutgers faces its first loss, played its worst game of the season, and Wisconsin just played its first complete game in maybe 2 years. I think there are some things that Wisconsin fans should take away from the win over Purdue and feel good about what that means for the team moving forward. The number I mentioned before, that Braden Locke checked into 17 different plays out of the 73 that they ran, and 16 of those were a net positive off of the initial play call. I think that's something you can take away and think, all right, there's something going on here. Braden Locke had, yes, 2 interceptions against Purdue, but one of them went like from a receiver's hands and chest, and he just like kind of barfed it out of his body, and it fell into the hands of a Purdue defensive back. And that probably isn't getting replicated. They've also figured out some stuff, I think, in terms of personnel changes that you were getting at there over the last couple of weeks, and not even just in the running back room. Wisconsin lost its number 1 and 2 wide receiver in the first half against Purdue. I believe both of them are going to end up playing this weekend. At least I spoke with Will Pauling yesterday. I spoke with him, and he seems to think he's good to go. They lost both those guys, but had real breakout games from Trech Kekahuna, a redshirt freshman who has just a ton of speed. And he broke a couple open, two touchdowns, and one of them was a 62-yarder, and most of that was yards after the catch. When asked about it after the game, he said he caught the ball and he just saw green grass ahead of him, and he went. He's fast when he gets the ball. Vinny Anthony is, I think, the first Badger in program history to have 2 games in a season with receiving touchdowns of 50+ yards, and he just did that in back-to-back games against USC and against and against Purdue. So some of these teams are breaking out. Yes, I was right. The first to do it since 2013 with Jared Abbrederis. That was Vinny Anthony, and he did it in back-to-back games. So there are some playmakers who are breaking out here, and maybe it is Braden Locke finally getting comfortable, being able to flex his knowledge of the playbook, doing a little bit more. There's stuff to take away. Purdue's not great, and I don't know what that means going forward against a much better team. But there are reasons to think some of this might be sticky, where some of the guys who haven't gotten as many snaps in the past, Trutch Kekahuna, Vinny Anthony, even Darian Dupree, running back, that freshman running back that Alabama really wanted, who he's got some real speed to him too. And I think at this point is maybe an improvement over Ches Malusi, could change things for the better moving forward for Wisconsin.
Yeah, really good points. And to be fair, I mean, Wisconsin did face Alabama and also USC, two ranked teams. So while they were going through a lot of personnel changes, so certainly a factor. If Wisconsin's going to go into Rutgers and win, what are the key factors for you in terms of them doing that?
I think that they need to be able to run the ball and run the ball well. I don't think they are going to be able to pass the ball around the yard like they did against Purdue, by any means. They're not going to be able to pass the ball against Rutgers like they were able to pass the ball against Purdue. They passed for 359 yards against Purdue, which is the first time a Wisconsin quarterback has passed for over 300 yards since 2015, when Joel Stave did it also against Purdue. There's just some weird voodoo magic where Wisconsin has not lost to Purdue in 18 years. So I don't know how replicable that is. They're going to have to be able to run the ball better. I think Purdue probably has the worst defensive backs in the Big Ten. They lost their starting defensive back corner going into that game on game day. And they play a whole lot of man coverage. I don't know what they're doing in West Lafayette. It doesn't make sense. So they're not going to be able to get their own just through the air. They need Tawee Walker to run very well. They're probably going to need to get some stuff from Darian Dupree as well, maybe out of the backfield. Cade Yakimelli is a sleeper name here for your listeners to know. He is running back 3 and is averaging like over 7 yards per carry right now. He is that third running back, though. He's kind of a little bit of a different change of pace, and he might be able to set some stuff up there for them. They also need to be better on third down than they have been so far this season. They had a little bit of a get-right game against Purdue, where they held Purdue on third down to only converting 1 of 11, I think it was. But against USC, they were, I think it is 11 of 16. So not anywhere near as good against USC as they were against Purdue. So they need to get better there on the 6th. And I think that comes down to the same things that have been hurting the defense in the red zone. They're having a hard time getting off the field at times, whether that is because of the offenses they faced in Alabama and USC or a fundamental problem that they have personnel wise. I think this will be a good litmus test against a team that is probably the first they've played all year that I would say is closest to what the quality of this Wisconsin football program is. I think these two teams are of similar tiers in the Big Ten.
I agree with you. This was always one on the schedule that Rutgers fans have wanted. Rutgers never beating Wisconsin before. And a little bit of a toss-up game here. Rutgers over 2-point favorites, but I think both teams still trying to figure it out. And this is certainly a defining game for both, I think, in terms of the trajectory of their seasons and kind of personality as well. Kedrick, any closing thoughts on this matchup or anything that I didn't ask you that you think is notable for this game on Saturday?
I think this is do you think this is the pivot game for both teams, whether or not they make a bowl? Because I think if Wisconsin can't win this game, things get a lot harder. They have automatic losses against Oregon and Penn State on the schedule, in my opinion. Sorry. And then they have to play at Iowa, which is never a game I'm going to pick Wisconsin to win because I've been burned by that too many times. They have to play at Nebraska too. As some of these games that they have that are kind of toss-up-y games, they have to play on the road, and then you welcome Oregon and Penn State at home. I think it's really hard. Is this a game that you're looking at Rutgers needing to win to get to a bowl?
Not looking at it to need to get a bowl, and maybe that's too optimistic, but there was real hope going into the season. There was high expectations with as many returning players that they have back, with the schedule they have, which is by far the best they've ever had, with no Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa. It really is as favorable a schedule as you'll ever have in the Big Ten, and having obviously Kyle Monangai back. So there's a lot of things to like about their trajectory of what they could be, what their ceiling could be. That loss against Nebraska was so upsetting because their defense had not played great up to that point. It was their best performance by far. And then the offense had a real stinker, the worst performance of the season. If you lose this game to Wisconsin, it obviously puts more pressure the following week at UCLA, which they should win on paper. A unique 2-game homestand here. Then you go to USC, and then November, to be honest, looks harder than I think it looked going into the year. You have Minnesota at home, you're at Maryland, you have Illinois, and then you're at Michigan State. So the point is, Rutgers fans really had hopes of winning 9 or 10 games this year. And if you're going to win 9 or 10 games, you have to beat Wisconsin in this spot. I think you have to be 6-1 going to USC to have a chance at 6 or have a chance at 9 or 10 wins. So from a ceiling perspective, this would be a deflating loss for Rutgers. I think they still have enough to get to that 6-win total. They're already 4-1, but to be honest, 6 wins, even 7-5, I think would be a disappointment for a lot of Rutgers fans this year. After being year 5 of Schiano, having that breakthrough last year, having so many guys back, it just really would be disappointing with kind of a once in a lifetime schedule. So this is a huge game for Rutgers, no doubt. You've been pointing out Wisconsin's schedule ahead. That is pretty brutal. So this is obviously a huge game for them. And we'll see what happens. A lot of action to come. But Kedrick Stumbris, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you let fans know where they can find all your coverage this week leading up to Saturday's kickoff?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever your title of choice for that website is this week, at Kedrick Stumbris, KEDRICK STUMBRIS. I cover Wisconsin for Athlon Sports. I'm hoping to get to Piscataway to go watch Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey later this year. Is on a Monday though, which is a little hard. But looking forward to college basketball season starting there. And I also host the Sconnie Six Pack podcast, Sconnie SCONNIE, where we talk all things Wisconsin Badgers, Bucks, Brewers, and beyond.
And I'll link all of your where everyone can find you in the description of this episode as well. But great talking to you, and we'll do a flip reverse where I'm on your show as well. So we'll put that out for Rutgers fans to check out, and really appreciate you being here once again. And thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.
Thanks, Aaron.